And good morning, and welcome to the Skinny for Friday, March 13th. I'm Mitch Perry, the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, and I'm back here live in the studio. It's so good to be back here on the last day of the 60-day legislative session. I took off last night from Tallahassee back here in Tampa. And what do you know? My colleague, Ray Rowe, has been holding down the fort for the last 9 weeks, is taking a day off today. So it's just me and a lot of talk about what has happened in Tallahassee, and it's not over yet. Right now, actually, the House and Senate did start the day at 10 o'clock, but they've broken for whatever discussions, more messages going back and forth between the two chambers. They will close out the regular policy part of the session later today. Of course, as you probably know, they have not come to an agreement on a budget, which is the main thing, the only thing that they're constitutionally required to do before they leave. And so we're going to have another special session like we did last year on redistricting. That is happening later, but on the budget. And, you know, I'm going to open the phones later in the show, and I would love to hear from people because, of course, I'm so immersed in this, right? I've been covering this daily for 2 months plus, and so much that has gone on, so much that won't happen ultimately, that maybe is a good thing in terms of legislation. But I'm curious about what the listeners out there, how much you've been following of this, what's going on up there, because it is crucial. It really is. The idea that what happens up there is not meaningful for our lives living here in the Tampa Bay area or wherever you're listening to us, if you're in Florida, is absolutely insane. It's so crucial what goes on up there. And so, like I said, let's see. And later on the show, we're going to have a couple guests, okay? So it's not going to just me pontificating with you, although I really do want to hear from you. We're going to have a candidate running for the Special State Senate District 14 race. That is coming up. You may or may not be aware of the fact that that was represented by Jay Collins, who is, of course, our lieutenant governor. That seat has been empty for months and months now, but there's finally an election taking place in a week from Tuesday, and we're going to have the Democratic candidate on here in just a moment. We're also going to talk about one of the bills that was passed just this past week on labor, what critics are calling another union-busting bill. We're going to talk to Rich Templin from the Florida AFL-CIO, so that's coming up. But first, I'm going to just give you a few thoughts right now. And by the way, you know, there's a lot of local things that are important that we will talk about in the coming weeks. I just saw this report, of course, in the Tampa Bay Times regarding the $467 million now in tax money that the Hillsborough County is considering to use for the Tampa Bay Rays ballpark in Hillsborough County. That is going to be a huge issue. And this is really going to come to the fore very quickly here. They're going to decide on that really quickly here, according to the report in the Tampa Bay Times this morning. Also, you probably saw in the last couple of days, Tampa Mayor Jane Castor has been threatened with removal from office by Attorney General James Othmeyer, and what is a trend for him in going after local officials who he accuses of somehow espousing sanctuary city-type policies. Now, sanctuary cities is illegal in Florida, has been since 2019. But what are the policies? What's he talking about? And, you know, I don't know if we'll get into that today, but the mayor did respond to that. And basically, she will make it right. She's not going to be kicked out of office the last year. He's done this with Jerry Demings, the mayor of Orange County, who begrudgingly had to agree to what was going on with the case of some correction officers and working with ICE there last summer. This happened, of course, in Key West last year. This happened in Fort Myers when local officials said they didn't know that they wanted to sign this 287G agreement, which cities do not have to sign in Florida, by the way. Counties do. Nevertheless, it's kind of a trend and it's a tactic, and it's kind of unfortunate, I think. I mean, why not work together? You're all in public office, but that's not the way this administration in Tallahassee rolls. Okay, so did want to mention those because those are really big stories that have just come up here in the last couple of days. But, okay, so let's talk about what happened just last night in Tallahassee, okay? So the Florida legislature sent a bill to Governor DeSantis, the next big election reform bill. Donald Trump is trying to get the SAVE Act passed in Congress. He's not going to probably be able to do it. They're going to try to break the filibuster there. But the Florida version of the SAVE Act, which basically is requiring that only U.S. citizens vote. There's a lot of other parts of this election bill, but that's the main part of it. That was passed, and that is going to the governor's desk, and he will sign it very soon. Big day for the governor, or big week for the governor. We also saw that this bill has been passed that's going to allow him or the cabinet and the FDLE to define what a domestic terrorist group is. And we've reported, there's been published reports this week that says the office included language in that bill mandating that universities report international students who promote a foreign terrorist group to ICE. Then that language did not make it into the bill, but it now includes provisions expelling college students who promote quote unquote terrorist organizations. And of course, we should say that the big ones that Ron DeSantis talked about, the big issues that he cared about, property taxes and congressional redistricting, were never addressed in the last 60 days. We knew congressional redistricting was not going to, because the governor had said it was going to be a special session on April 20th. Also, though, on property taxes, it was never said aloud, but basically I and others thought they were probably never going to do anything about it. They did do something on it. The House did anyway, passed a joint resolution for a proposed constitutional amendment, but it's not going anywhere because the Senate did not follow suit. So there's going to be a special session on that coming up. In terms of the budget, we're told it's going to happen after Easter, the special session, which is probably be Monday, April 6th. Again, the congressional redistricting is Monday, April 20th, already set for. And then again, you have when are they going to talk about property taxes? I'm predicting that's going to be in May or June. DeSantis wants that as late as possible. He wants to put pressure on Republicans, I guess, to pass something that's got a lot of heft to it. Although, heck, they passed a measure that's basically going to get rid of property taxes completely. The House did. I don't know how much more you want from that. And the Senate says it's not going to go that far. So that's all happening. So the legislative session, even though there's no sine die happening later today, the policy bills will all end this afternoon tonight in Tallahassee. So again, if you're just tuning in, I'm Mitch Perry, back here at the main place here, the Phoenix at the with the Skinny here, I should say, the Phoenix. I'm with the Florida Phoenix. We're here talking about the redistricting and all of that, what's been happening. Oh, let me give you a couple quotes, though, folks, about some people who are very dissatisfied with what's happened in Tallahassee the last couple of months in terms of what did they do to help out us, regular Floridians. Okay, that's the job, right? Let me give you a quote from former House Speaker Paul Renner in a written statement. Now, of course, he's running for governor, not doing very well in the Republican race for governor, where Byron Donalds is lapping the field right now. But let me give you this quote here. So Renner said the other day, the most painfully obvious dereliction of duty is how Florida families are telling legislators loud and clear the cost of living is crushing them. He said, property taxes, insurance, utilities, the basics of staying in your home are getting harder to afford every year, and Tallahassee has just ignored it. He went on to say, the gridlock, the excuses, and the failure to act on the biggest issues facing our constituents is unacceptable. When half of Floridians say affordability is their number one concern, doing nothing is not just disappointing, it's an abdication of responsibility and a failure of leadership. And how about from Don Gates? Some of you may know him better as Matt Gates' dad, but of course he was the former Senate president, he's a legislator, a longtime legislator. He's back there in the Senate right now, and he's in his late 70s. He's been around. He's seen a lot. He told my colleague, Christine Sexton from the Florida Phoenix a couple days ago, he said, quote, I think we ought to be embarrassed. I think it's a shame. And as Republicans, we have a Republican governor, Republican House, and a Republican Senate. We don't have any Democrats to argue with anymore. He said, Democrats are in a decided minority, so we decided to argue with each other. That's inexcusable as Republicans. I think that it's bad stewardship as conservatives, and I certainly hope that we improve and improve very quickly. And then he said by the end of this week, it might be the worst. I think the last two sessions will be the least productive sessions I've ever been in. And he says this is because of what I consider to be an inexcusable amount of animosity among leaders in this Capitol building. I think it's inexcusable. We all ought to be embarrassed by it. So again, we've talked about some of the things that they have passed. Oh, by the way, what are some of the things they've had? I will tell you this week, they spent so much time on self-congratulatory announcements. I guess they do this when the officials are leaving office. Everybody gets a few minutes in the House. So we saw from Tampa Bay area, Fentress Driscoll, she's leaving the Florida House. Michelle Rayner, Diane Hart, they all got their moment in the sun, if you will, a few minutes. They limit them in the House. The Senate, they go on for hours. Darryl Roussan, Joe Gruters, they're all leaving. Folks, they spent so much time this week talking about themselves and not really passing anything. But we did see during the session, we're naming the Palm Beach International Airport after Donald Trump. Okay, that is happening. They spent countless hours talking about naming streets after both Trump and Charlie Kirk. And I'm not sure if actually that's passed yet, the Charlie Kirk Day of Remembrance. But there were other serious things, the election bill, the union busting bill, and we're going to get to that. Okay, so I did mention a moment ago, so there is a legislative election coming up very shortly, and I want to bring in now one of our guests here. That is Brian Nathan. He is the Democrat running in the State Senate District 14 special election, which is taking place, well, the last day to vote is March 24th, and I believe early voting begins tomorrow.
That's correct. It's the 14th through the 21st.
Okay, and Brian is Democrat. Like I say, he's running against Republican State Representative Josie Tomkow, who right now is already in the House. She's termed out in her district in Polk County, now running for the seat here in Hillsborough County. And so, Brian, great. Thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you.
It's great to be here, Mitch. I appreciate being able to come on the show.
Yeah, want to let our listeners know. Again, so tell us, again, so it's not everybody can vote on this, but the district, it's in Western Hillsborough County. Roughly, what are the contours of the district?
So generally, it's west of 275 to the Pinellas line from South Tampa to Pasco. And then there is a bit that swings to the east out towards Tampa Palms, so it captures some of the university area as well.
Any part of South Tampa?
All of South Tampa.
All of South Tampa, okay.
It covers Davis Island, but
okay.
Harbor Island. And honestly, it gets a little bit of weird, Yeah. Your neighbors across the street are in one district, you're in another district. Right through the Hyde Park area is kind of where it gets strange.
Good. And again, now, you got to be registered to vote, of course. As it works in Florida, 29 days before the election, you have to be registered. So if you are, though, and if you're in that district area, it sounds like you might be in there, get out and vote. And voting by mail is already happening right now. And by the way, we have invited Josie Tomkow to come on the program next week. She's obviously busy right now in Tallahassee, so hopefully she will take our offer up. But let's learn more about you, Brian. I know very little about you. I know you're a Navy veteran, and you're an electrician and leader of the local International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers chapter. Is that correct?
That is correct. I served in the Navy as a cryptologist for 6 years. Met my wife there, and we decided when we got out around the same time, that we wanted to make our home in Tampa.
Where are you from originally?
Originally, grew up in New York. I moved to the Atlanta area, the suburbs, little town called Woodstock, back in 95, and then I enlisted in 2003, excuse me.
Okay, shortly after 9/11.
Yeah, like I said, I served for 6 years. I deployed 3 times to the Arabian Gulf, twice on the USS Mason. That's a destroyer. And then once on the USS Carr, that's a frigate, now decommissioned.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that. And we're gonna. I don't want to get too deep into this right now about union stuff, but I do want to. You're obviously very much involved with unions here. I got to ask you about SB 1296, the bill that was passed just, I guess, a couple days ago. It's going to the governor here. This is considered by people who observe this, and certainly organized labor officials, to be really going to be potentially devastating. And we'll get into the details, but what's your thoughts about what went on that bill?
This is an outright attack on workers. I mean, I'm not going to spare any words on this, but this bill is designed to make lives harder for people who want a union, which is, to be clear, a protected right in our state constitution. I think it's Article 1, Section 6. You have the right to work, right to work, and then the right to have a union. And this builds on the terrible work that was done with Senate Bill 256 back in 2023, just to make it harder to have a union. It's moving the goalpost because the union stepped up. When 256 went into effect, making it more difficult to have a union, the teachers' unions, all these unions stepped up, met that threshold, proved they could do it. They removed dues deductions straight off the paycheck. These unions had to figure out, how are we going to collect dues? They figured it out. They did it. They met the threshold. Now they're just trying to make it harder. This came from the Freedom Foundation, to be clear.
Absolutely.
Rusty, I'm drawing a blank on his last name.
He testified in Tallahassee.
I was there that day when he testified.
Yeah.
And he said they wrote this bill because it is the stated mission of the Freedom Foundation to get rid of unions.
Yeah.
And we're going to find a way to work around this. Either when I get to Tallahassee, repeal it, or we're going to make sure my brothers and sisters in the public sector can keep their union that they want.
And your opponent, she did vote for this bill, we should say. And we're going to talk with Rich Temple a little later in the show to get more into that. So let's move on, though, from that. On property taxes, let's talk about this because this is front and center. Ron DeSantis made it such a huge issue with Blaise Ngoglia, the CFO, for 6 months leading into the legislative session. Then they didn't really. Well, I shouldn't say they did and they didn't do anything. Right? The House is very serious. They took it very seriously, and they have passed basically a measure which I'm very cynical about because they were not going to pass the measure they actually did. Then the Senate, who was quiet the whole session, said we're going to do something probably on it. But it's not going to be what they're doing. And so they changed the bill that they passed, the joint resolution which they passed, it's not even a bill, that would basically phase out property taxes immediately, January 1. And that would be the ballot measure, right? Now, again, the Senate didn't touch it, so it's going nowhere. But that's whatever, there was different levels of maybe doing this, Do you support any type of property tax proposal to put on the ballot that would reduce property taxes?
To be clear, the one that the House was working on, I do not support that one.
Yes.
But yeah, property taxes do need to be looked at. I know my property taxes have gone up an insane amount. When we bought our current house, my mother retired. She moved in with us. We got a bigger house. The first year, I want to say it was around $2,500. We're around $9,000, getting close to $10,000 a year in property taxes. So maybe we need to look at, upping that homestead exemption. But getting rid of them completely is, pardon the idiom, but throwing the baby out with the bathwater. How are we going to fund our public schools, our first responders, paving the roads, all the things, all the functions of the local government?
Now, we should say that they've always said that it would be on homestead properties only and it would not touch schools. That's what they've always said. But yet, all the other things which local governments do, like you mentioned, including law enforcement, most crucially. By the way, we're just talking with Brian Nathan. He is the Democratic candidate running in the special election for State Senate District 14, which is taking place on March 24th. There was homestead exemption, maybe raising that, something along those lines.
Something to help our seniors that have paid off their home. I've heard that as I've gone around the community. These people that have been in their home for 30 plus years and they're concerned about their property taxes because they're on a fixed income. I think there are ways we can address the property tax issue without just throwing it all out.
Now, Republicans say, because the issue, we'll talk about affordability, which a poll came out last week from the University of North Florida, said by far 50%, that's the number one issue that Floridians care about. And as I was just reading some quotes from Don Gates and Paul Renner, Republicans saying Republicans haven't really addressed that. One of the things that I asked this as Speaker Daniel Perez the other day, I read off the quotes from Renner, and he said, well, we are in the House of doing something on property taxes, and we proposed last year the biggest sales tax ever in the history of Florida. That didn't happen, but nevertheless, he says that's how we're dealing with affordability. I'm going to assume that you're going to say that they haven't really done much on affordability. But what would Brian Nathan and what could again, it's very hard as a Democrat, in the minority. So what could you try to get done on affordability if you get elected to the legislature?
So I know when I've gone out to the community, I've talked to people, and it doesn't matter where they are, West Chase, Town and Country, South Tampa, Lutz, it's always the same three things. Property taxes, yes, property insurance, and the rates we're getting from TECO. The PSC has been passing these insane rate increases. For what? We're not seeing any value out of it. It's being passed on to their shareholders. So we need to look at the way the PSC is put together, the Public Service Commission.
Yes.
Because... yeah, like we're paying through the nose for power. Some of the rates we've had have been the biggest in history in this area. And what is the benefit we're getting back? I don't see the benefit in the community right now. My potential constituents, my neighbors, my friends, my family aren't seeing the benefit from it. So what are we looking at? I'd consider taking the PSC to a public election rather than being appointed by the governor.
Interesting you say that. I know that in Georgia, right, last fall, there was, when the Democrats won the gubernatorial races in Virginia and New Jersey, they also won on their equivalent to the PSC. Apparently, the Democrats had never won on that board. But yeah, just show you how people, when it comes to energy rates and the like, and don't like the rubber stamping, which has always gone on here at the PSC since I've been here for 20-something years. Speaking of that, there is legislation watered down about AI data centers, which I believe the legislature is going to pass. There was also a separate bill, the AI Bill of Rights, that DeSantis was espousing that I don't think is going to get there. And there's been some push and pull in the legislature. Donald Trump apparently has directly been talking to the House Speaker Perez about what they like and don't like about these bills. But have you been following that at all? What do you think about trying to regulate data centers, which is what one of those bills is trying to do?
I have been following it both in my professional life as an electrician with the IBEW. I mean, that's huge for us the amount of work, but also as the candidate. And yeah, we need to figure out the rules for these data centers before they come into the state of Florida, because we've seen what's happened in other states, specifically Memphis. That's the one I always go back to, where they were running an AI data center off of emergency generators. I believe 37 of them. They violate EPA regulations. They pollute the air. They pollute the water. They're incredibly noisy. And this is how they were powering a data center. These things are meant for a hospital, after a hurricane. There are people that need power. Lives are affected. People can die if they don't have power, but it's meant to be temporary, not a permanent solution. So before we get to that, we need to have some rules, some guardrails up, because we don't need what's happened in other states happening in Florida. We just talked about utility prices. We don't need electricity prices doubling, tripling, and in some places, some instances, quadrupling. It's already expensive enough to live here. Throwing these into rural communities is just going to make their lives harder. So if we're going to do this, if we're going to have AI data centers in Florida, there need to be some guardrails that respect the communities that these facilities are going into.
Again, if you're just tuning in right now, it's you're listening to The Skinny here on WMNF 88.5 FM. It's 27 minutes after the hour. I'm Mitch Perry, the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix and the co-host of the Phoenix here without my co-host, Ray Roa, today. We're speaking right now for the next few minutes with Brian Nathan. He's a Democratic candidate running for the election in the State Senate District 14 seat. That election is taking place on March 24th. Now, I was saying earlier, Jay Collins, who had the seat, back one in 2022. And Ron DeSantis, I think, named him in August, I believe it was, when he selected him to be the lieutenant governor. So this seat has been empty for 9 months, and obviously was not represented during the past legislative session. And I guess that was intentional. I believe there was actually a bill, it's not going to get passed, that was going to change that. I think Tina Polsky supported that in the Senate, that would say you have to have hard dates when this happens like this, so you can get representation. That seems fair to me. I don't think there's anything ideological about that whatsoever.
So, yeah, we're going back all the way to August 12th. That was the day that Jay Collins was announced, and I know that date because that's the date I filed and my name showed up with the Division of Elections up in Tallahassee. That's when I became a candidate. So it was, I want to say, 73 days from the vacancy to the announcement.
Okay, right.
To the election. And yeah, there is no reason for 500,000 Floridians to have been without representation in this session. That's how many people live in District 14. So 500,000 of our friends, our neighbors, weren't represented. And this has been a huge problem. That bill, one draft of it that I saw, I believe it was 2 weeks. An special election has to be announced in 2 weeks. To give us some contrast, when my opponent announced, it was a matter of days before a special election was announced.
Oh, is that right?
Yes. I want to say it was 2. I could be wrong, but it was no more than a week.
Right.
So we have a District 14 that is purple. It can go either way. It's very tight. The district she's coming from is very, very red. It's a safe district.
Okay, Brian, you say it's purple, but I know Jay Collins won it by 10 points over Janet Cruz in 2022. Now, that was even worse than the 2024 election was, in a way, the 2022 election was bad for Democrats because they didn't come out and vote in big numbers. They came out in bigger numbers in 2024. That was a seat, you're right, that was considered very much a purple seat at that time. Janet Cruz had beaten Dana Young in 2018, and it went to a recount. It was so close. And in fact, Ron DeSantis, that's why it was actually, I think, going to be Sean Harris who was running that seat. And then they recruited Jay Collins, who was originally running for Congress, right?
Yeah, against Kathy Castor.
They like, Jay Collins. He has a good story. He's a good candidate. He ran and he beat Janet Cruz pretty decisively. But you say that you can take, obviously you wouldn't be getting into this thing if you didn't think you'd win.
Yeah, I'm not going to come in here and say, I got in this to lose. Yeah. But yeah, looking at the numbers, I pulled the ballot returns, and these haven't been counted. These are just who has returned a ballot.
Democrat versus
Republican MPA, and other. We have been as close as 150. I think we're down to around 250 difference between my opponent and I. Anybody can look at the financial reports. They have far outspent
She has
me.
Millions in the PAC's money.
They have far outspent me. I knew they were going to raise more money than me. She's a sitting legislator. She has tons of money. And it's this tight. You can't tell me that this isn't a purple district when my scrappy little race that's raised maybe $100,000 all in to date versus her millions that she has in a PAC, $300,000 that she walked in her campaign account. And we're this tight. This is a purple seat. I don't really care what the pundits are saying. This is a purple seat. This is eminently winnable for Democrats. We're seeing it. I've had Republicans come up to me at events saying, I'm a Republican. I voted for Trump, but I'm voting for you. So that tells me there is something changing in this district.
Okay, again, we're talking with Brian Nathan. He's a Democrat, as he's just talking about, in this race, special district race, Senate District 14 race. And a couple more questions I have for you, Brian. Basically, now, so if you were elected, you would go up for these special sessions, right?
That's correct.
And so one of them would be, we know for sure, is on congressional redistricting. That's set to take place on April 20th through April 24th. Now, so much we could say about this. I wrote, if I could broadcast or talk about a story I wrote a couple weeks ago in the Phoenix about this, because my premise was Ron DeSantis has said, we're not doing this for partisan gain because as we know, we do have the Florida Fair Districts Amendment, which makes it illegal to do that, right? So Ron has said, I'm going to be forced to do this because the U.S. Supreme Court's going to be ruling on this, on the Voting Rights Act, Section 2, in this case, this Louisiana case, right? The Supreme Court is going to rule on this before their session ends. But by the way, that may not be till the end of June, okay? The problem for DeSantis, if that's your premise, you're going to do this straight face.
In preemption. Well, he's getting ahead of the court.
Right, exactly. So it's one thing to say that we're going to be forced to do this, whether that's true or not. Now, others will say that the Florida Supreme Court, not the U.S. Supreme Court, but the Florida Supreme Court opened the way for this when they approved his map that he did back in 2022 of a district in North Florida that changed dramatically. It was formerly a black seat, basically, as it were. Al Lawson had that, and that changed, and the Supreme Court allowed the Florida Supreme Court allowed that. So we'll see about that. But anyway, what are your thoughts as you go up there? If you were to be elected and you go up there on April 20th and you're going to be debating this issue?
So we have a process in place. We've had it since the Constitution was drafted about the 10-year cycle with the census. That's when redistricting happens. That's when apportionment happens. We're doing this mid-cycle for no other reason than the president's demanding it. There is no urgency. Nothing has changed fundamentally in this country that we need to even get into this. This is purely at the behest of Donald Trump, and DeSantis is giving him what he asks for.
Yeah, exactly. Another bill I want to ask you about is, did you follow this basically you call it an anti-DEI bill? What it says now is that local governments cannot do any type of policy. They can't spend any money on any type of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, which has really led to a lot of confusion and concern from local officials. Again, because this bill says we can remove you from office if you're violating this, but there's concerns about pride events, concerns about even Italian Heritage Day, what have you. And they made a lot of caveats in this legislation because of those concerns. But nevertheless, this is passed. This is going to go to the governor's desk as well. You followed that at all? You have any thoughts?
I followed it. So I have some thoughts, and I'll try to keep it concise.
Yeah, please.
So first of all, I think the fact that there are so many caveats and carve-outs tell you exactly who this is aimed at, that this isn't about protecting heritage. It's targeting specific communities. But more importantly, what we're really seeing is preempting local governments from serving their communities. This has been a theme that's been ongoing through the DeSantis administration. You don't do what they like, they're going to get a bill passed. So the ability to serve your community is taken away. We saw this in St. Petersburg. We had ordinances with the city of St. Petersburg and the city of Tampa about apprenticeship on city jobs. They didn't like it. They got a bill passed that you couldn't, city ordinances couldn't address what they called conditions of employment. So who you had to hire, do you have to hire apprentices, newly returned citizens, things like that serve that particular community. They didn't like that. DeSantis didn't like that. So they passed legislation that, nope, the ability to do that is remanded to the state. And just for clarity, we're talking about city ordinances that govern things like heat stress. Down in Miami, they had an ordinance that as it got hotter, you had to give more breaks, provide more shade, water. That got removed because that overstepped the bounds that Tallahassee put on the city of Miami. This is just one more instance where Tallahassee is preempting local governments who know how to serve their constituents best. And it boggles my mind because this used to be a tenet, part of the gospel of Republican politics, that the government closest to the people serves them best. And they have gotten so far away from that I don't recognize this Republican Party anymore.
All right, Brian Nathan, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for coming into the studio.
My pleasure.
Talking about your candidacy. I want to wish you the best of luck. Again, tell our listeners, how they can get involved in and to vote for you.
Yeah, so yes, the early voting dates, the 14th through the 21st. Election day is March 24th. You can go to the website, brian4senate.us. You can spell it either with an I or a Y. We've got both websites. And you can sign up to phone bank, get out and knock doors with us. We've got less than 2 weeks to go. So every door we knock, every voter we touch is closer to turning this ship around.
All right, Brian Nathan, thank you so much for joining us here on The Skinny.
Thank you so much, Mitch. I appreciate it.
Okay. Now, we were going to have a guest here. We're still hoping to get him on. I mentioned Rich Templin earlier. Apparently, Rich has not called in yet, so I will open the telephone lines here. I want to hear from you, the listeners here, 813-239-9663. I want to know, have you been following anything going on or everything or what have you? I mean, there's so much going on. There was over 1,600 bills filed right before the session began. I believe, roughly a couple hundred passed. Now, it's even made it through both chambers yet. In fact, I think there's less than 60 that have done that at this point. It's definitely below where it was a year ago at this time. And what in fact, it matters to you? What are you concerned about that has gone up there? Again, as we were saying in this, just talking to Brian Nathan here, the big ones that got a lot of attention, property taxes and redistricting to another extent, nothing has happened with that whatsoever. Where will it go on that? They're going to come back. They didn't even deal with that over the last 60 days. So again, what did they deal with? Well, there's a lot of stuff like, talk about the DEI bill, for example. Man, there were some very intense conversations on the floor of the Senate, especially with the black women lawmakers, the Democrats. It gets very visceral, some of this stuff. And, it's a continuation of what people could call the culture wars that, they thought Ron DeSantis, had already won, if you will. I mean, Florida, right? I mean, that stuff has already happened, but there's been more. Now, I will tell you, and I couldn't tell you exactly where it's at right now, but I've covered several bills this session that look like I don't think they're going to make it. And we can, again, get into that, later on the following weeks. But that were along those lines. I think there's even something about Confederate monuments, where basically they would, let's see here, I think I wrote one of these stories here that it got one hearing that it was basically going to, it was going to ban local governments from enacting or enforcing any local ordinance, regulation, or rule removing, damaging, or destroying a historic Florida monument or memorial. And if they did that, they could be fined $1,000. Again, so, remember when Hillsborough, the summer of 2017, they removed their monument that was just took over the whole summer of 2017 after Charlottesville, and actually before the Dylan Roof killing in South Carolina in 2015. So. No. Okay. Okay. So again, 813-239-9663. I was hoping again we would talk about we would get Rich in here, but he's not going to do that. Okay. So I mentioned earlier. I guess I'll bring this back up again. Let's talk about this story here. Get on a more local level. If talking about state news somehow is not doing it for you here, Hillsborough County. Okay. The discussion here, and this is April 1st. They could vote on this. So that is a couple weeks away. Okay, this is the deal. For the Tampa Bay Rays ballpark proposal, it's being built around using $467 million from a sales tax that most Hillsborough County commissioners have said should be off limits to new sports stadiums. This is, of course, being reported by the Tampa Bay Times. And this money would come from the CIT, the Community Investment Tax. That's, of course, was recently renewed. That pays for roads, public buildings, and things like upgrades to Raymond James Stadium, to the Amalie Arena, or Benchmark International, I guess they call it now. So that is now being discussed here amongst county commissioners, that they would use this source, which is a lot, right? That's a lot of money. That the stadium is being discussed being over $1 billion. That half of it would come from this, almost half of it from that source. I guess that would be the major part, because the Rays owners, I believe, have essentially said that they would pay up to a half. I know they're saying that more than the Stuart Sternberg, which is his always the limit, was a third they would pay here. So the thing which is fascinating about this, I know they're on this huge, pace to do this. This does come before property taxes, though, right? This whole discussion about how much money Hillsborough County is going to have in its coffers after November. We are going to, I'm going to say it, we're going to have a constitutional amendment on the ballot because Ron DeSantis has declared that he wants this on the ballot on reducing property taxes. Probably not eliminating completely, but reducing it. So that's going to affect every local government in the state. That is a fact. Now, whether that means that, how do you recalibrate those funds? What do you do with that? That is something that we don't know, obviously. And those governments are not going to have serious discussions about doing that until they know what they're dealing with here, which won't be till after November. But this is obviously these folks, these raise owners, they want to deal with something now, right? They just spent all this money on this. What was it, 1.7 million? They spent a ton of money on the raise, and they're not screwing around. And Ron DeSantis did say at one point early on when he was down here in Tampa at Hillsborough Community College that hey, maybe they'll go to Orlando, which is what frankly I've always thought might be the possibility. Why not? That's not as big a media market as Tampa. Tampa is roughly the 14th biggest media market in the country. Tampa Bay area. Orlando is 18th. Commissioner Rob Manfred has said he wants to keep the stadium here. That's why they're still, that's why they basically told Sternberg, hey, after you renege on the deal for the prospect of the Trop, okay, you got to move on. By the way, we did get a couple texts here in between. We actually, we just had Brian Nathan on here. Somebody just voted for Brian Nathan, or he told me, he wrote on here, my kind of man, he writes, and that's from Citrus Park, Dan. And then we see Paul writes in from Holiday. He says, did I hear that Trump had trademarked his name and anything named after him will have to pay copyright fees? That did come up on the discussion of the President Donald J. Trump International Airport. Right, that had come right before they actually voted on that. And I think they put some language in there, or he said, actually there was a statement read, and because they're not allowed to bring props up there. But anyway, a statement was read from Donald Trump Jr. that said, oh, no, we're not going to do that, though, if we get this thing passed. They actually literally, I think it was Meg Weinberger from South Florida who was sponsoring that bill there. So good question, though, because that's going to happen, folks. I don't know what the code is. Like Tampa International's TPA. Is this going to be DJT now when you're flying to Palm Beach? And by the way, the rhetoric was pretty intense on that. And I mentioned also, I'm not sure what's going to happen with Charlie Kirk, a Charlie Kirk Day of Remembrance, where that is in the process. I believe in Arizona, where Turning Point USA was located out there, where Charlie Kirk's main headquarters was. They passed that, and then the Democratic governor, vetoed that proposal that just came up. We'll see. Ron DeSantis will absolutely sign that. He will not veto that if it actually, in fact, comes up to him. Okay, so let's see here. We've got going on here. Okay. Again, all right, I'm going to keep on here. Okay, so let's get into more about this election bill. Okay, so because I remember talking to Ray Rowe. Again, if you're just tuning in right now, I'm Mitch Perry. I'm the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix. I'm here hosting the Skinny, 11:44 a.m. here on March 13th, the final day of the Florida legislative session. But of course, it will go into overtime because they have not come up with a budget. On that election bill, I think I've heard somebody call into the show and say, hey, what are the Democrats complaining about here? And I've heard this Republican say it's an 80-20 issue. How could you not be for banning U.S., making sure that non-citizens don't vote? What are you, cheaters? What's going on here? And that makes sense, right? I mean, I get that. And it's not, and maybe that's, and this is what's going on in Washington, D.C. with this SAVE Act. What the concern is from Voting Rights Acts and from Democrats is, so now you're going to have proof of, show your identification. And obviously the best way is with a driver's license, right? And a real compliant ID, if you will, real ID compliant driver's license, which basically has been the law since 2005. And in fact, but the problem is some people don't have access to that, right? Or a birth certificate or a valid passport. They said on the floor 2 days ago, Aaron Grawl, the senator who's sponsoring this bill, said there's, I believe, 800,000 plus people who do not have a real ID compliant driver's license. So that's the potential pool of people who, if they're re-registering right now, if you're already registered, I don't believe you're going to be called on this right now. If you're going to vote in the special election, you're already registered. That's not going to be a problem. The problem is if you're changing your address, changing your party registration, anytime you're going to have to interact with the state, the supervisor elections, this is where this is going to come into play. And they bring up that this happened in Kansas back in 2011, and there were thousands of people, registered U.S. citizens, voters, who were kicked off the voting rolls. So this is the concern, okay? So, what are your thoughts about that? 239-9663, 813-239-9663. Excuse me, 813-239-9663. Okay, we've got Steve calling in from Largo. Steve, good morning. You're welcome to Skinny.
Hey, thank you for being one of Florida's premier journalists. You've been great for years.
Thank you.
I wish I was talking about what you're just talking about, but I have a very important topic that I hope you or Craig Pittman or somebody will cover. It's massive. Here's the deal. The Gulf of Mexico, or the Gulf of America, 99.999% of it has been handed over to the highest impact industries and people. I'm talking about extractive industries like mining, oil, fishing, crab trapping, as well as motorized watercraft. There is zero legal protection that mandates any kind of zone in the Gulf of Mexico anywhere, including right next to shore, for non-motorized people, swimmers, kayakers, etc. Not only that, but I'm in Pinellas. There's a wealthy libertarian enclave called Bel Air Shore that has a lot of MAGAs in it, many of whom are criminals and felons, including one fugitive. And they think they own the entire beach all the way down to the Gulf, not just the high water line, but the entire beach. And they will come out and threaten people with guns. Pinellas County sheriffs won't do anything about that. In fact, in some cases, Pinellas County sheriffs are functioning as an unpaid private security force for this wealthy little enclave that's stuck between Indian Rocks Beach and Bel Air Beach. The Gulf of Mexico handed over to the highest impact users. The lowest impact users are actually, I'm a swimmer, I have zero impact. We are constantly under threat from motorized watercraft, fishermen, crab trappers. Nobody will do anything to protect us. There are things that you're probably aware of, like the Florida Public Trust Doctrine and others, that say that this is illegal. I've contacted Bernie Jacques, my local representative. I've contacted Anna Polina Lunatic. She doesn't care. I've contacted the Tampa Bay Times. Nobody cares. But maybe you will, and I hope I've succinctly outlined the problem.
Well, Steve, I really appreciate you calling in, and I will absolutely try to look into that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you. Okay, I think we do have Rich Templin here. Rich, good morning. Rich Templin.
Good morning, Mitch.
Hey.
How are you?
All right. Again, want to tell our listeners this is Rich Templin. He's the Director of Politics and Public Policy with the Florida AFL-CIO. Rich, thanks so much for joining us here. Okay, Rich, I want to talk obviously about Senate Bill 1296. This bill does several things, but the one that has been written about most prominently is regarding the vote for public sector labor unions to be recertified. Currently, those unions are recertified with a majority vote. Now it would require 50% of the entire bargaining unit to pass it with 50% support. Why is this? Why are you so concerned about this bill?
Well, hey, Mitch, and again, sorry I'm running a little bit late for your broadcast, but first it's really important for your listeners to understand that there's not a single public sector employer who asked for this legislation. There's no public sector employees that have asked for this legislation. As a matter of fact, most of the public bureaucracies around the state are not in favor of it, but they haven't been in a position to articulate that, and virtually zero public sector workers are in favor of it. This was literally done, and reporting from you and others have shown that it's at the behest of billionaire think tanks from out of state who have curried favor with the governor, and it was the governor who forced this through. The members of the Senate did not want it, which is why they, on multiple occasions, watered it down. Wouldn't let it out of committee, but the Senate president, for the governor, just kept moving the bill around from committee, removing committees so that they were able to get it passed. The reason this is so problematic is that when folks vote, there's two parts to the process. One is voting for the initial certification of a union. And now, under Senate Bill 256, which passed in 2023, people who vote for the union now have to start actually paying dues, even though that's a violation of Article 1, Section 6 of Florida's Constitution, which says that you have a right to collective bargaining, but you also have, quote, the right to work, end quote, meaning you cannot be compelled to join the union through paying of dues. Well, now you have to do both. And so typically, when you look at these recertification elections, people don't come out and vote no. They vote yes. Mm-hmm. When you look at it, it's 90%, 95% of all the ballots cast are in favor. Almost none are in opposition. But often the number of people voting does not necessarily in fact, rarely does it represent 50% of the total bargaining unit. So what that means now is that a failure to vote, a choice not to vote, is a no vote.
Right.
And that's why this is so problematic, because if this standard were in place for all of our elections, the legislature would be empty. There are very few senators or state representatives who can point to their districts and say, hey, I had over a 50% turnout in my race, and as a matter of fact, I won over 50% of my entire district. And so that's why this is so problematic. It's not that, it's not that there's any fear of accountability or anything like they've been saying. It's just that bar is just so unreasonably high.
Right. And let me break in here because what you're saying, and we are talking with Rich Templin from the Florida AFL-CIO. So that's been the point, right? And so Jenna Persons-Mullica, who is a Republican from Fort Myers who sponsored this bill in the House, she was asked this the other day, and she said basically, she says, we have example after example where a bargaining unit represents hundreds or thousands of employees and only a handful show up and vote in favor of continuing the union. She says that's a problem, and that's a problem we're trying to solve with this litigation. So what do you say to that?
Well, that's the second part of the problem here. Right now, it's the state that sets the elections. They set the time and they set the place of those elections. So, for example, one of the cases that she cited, and when she says it over and over and over again, almost every case that has been cited in debate, either in committee or on the floor of the House or Senate, that's the only cases. So they're literally picking the most extreme examples and pretending that is the norm. But one of the cases that she cites was at FAMU University for their graduate assistants. Now, that election was set in the middle of the summer, in between summer terms. So the campus was empty. There were no graduate students, or very few graduate students, who were on campus to participate in the election. And so when she cites that low number, it's because there were no voters available. And one of the concessions that the Senate agreed to and then went back on their word was to say that, look, when these elections are set, it has to be in consultation with both the petitioner, in this case the union, and the Public Employees Relations Commission. Because another example, in Miami-Dade County, which has hundreds and hundreds of work sites where people work, all of the different schools across Miami-Dade County, hundreds of them, they were only setting up voting places in less than 10. So you're now asking teachers to give up their free time, to get in their car, battle Miami-Dade traffic to drive across the county to vote in these elections.
Right.
So, and again, that was a concession that was agreed to in the Senate, but was scuttled at the last minute, at the insistence of the governor. And again, the organization, the Freedom Foundation, that wrote this legislation, their purpose for existence, it says it on their website, is the elimination of unions from the public sector. So when these legislators are saying they're trying to help workers and help the unions, well, they're doing so with language that was designed to wipe out those unions and by extension hurt those workers.
Rich, last question for you. We only have a couple minutes left here. Of course, this legislation comes after SB 256, which was really devastating 3 years ago, which I talked about with Brian Nathan earlier in the show here. It's a different Tallahassee, obviously, because, I know that some of these Republicans have tried to push this stuff for many, many years, but you did have Republicans. I think about Jack Latval from Pinellas County. There used to be Republicans that were more pro-labor, frankly, that would block some of this stuff, and those people are gone now. Isn't that correct?
I would, to be honest, Mitch, I wouldn't say they're gone.
Okay.
I mean, if you look at the Senate, for example,
right,
this year and in 256, we had 5 Republicans vote no, and really there were 6, but one wasn't here. When you look at the House, we had an unprecedented number, I think 8 or 9,
right,
who voted against
8, yeah.
it. Those Republicans are still in the state of Florida. The problem has been the outsized role that this governor has been exerting over the legislative process, to the point where they're no longer an independent, co-equal branch of government. They're an arm of the governor's office. And
also, this bill, like 256, separates law enforcement, police, firefighters, correction officers. Seems pretty cynical that they did it that way.
It has everything to do with politics. They are supporting, and again, I have to ask, if Representative Pearsons-Malika is so set that this is beneficial for workers, then why are we not extending those benefits to our first responders? Right? If all of this is so good for working people, why are they not included? Why don't we give them all of these benefits? The bottom line is they have excluded those organizations who more typically than not support them at the ballot box and support them with contributions. And that is just so disingenuous, for somebody to say on one hand, hey, workers, take this is good for you. But on the other hand, saying, oh, but we're not going to give all of these positive benefits to our first responders.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Rich Templin, he is from the Florida AFL-CIO. Rich, so great to talk to you this morning. Thank you so much.
Mitch, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, folks. So we're gonna leave it there. I'm so glad we got Rich on for a little bit. We would have liked to have him on for more, to talk more about what's going on there in Tallahassee. He also, Rich is such a big, powerful advocate, lobbyist. He talks about a lot more than just pure labor when he's discussing bills up there in Tallahassee. Wanted to get his thoughts about that session. Maybe we'll get him back on later on. Okay, that is going to do it for us right now. We're so glad to be back here at the Phoenix. I keep on saying this. I'm with the Phoenix, back at the Skinny here. By the way, I want to again shout out folks that 3 weeks ago who gave us over our goal to raise money to keep this station on the air and keep the show going for years and years to come, hopefully. Look forward to having Ray Roa back here. Want to thank Skip Sessi. He's been our engineer. I think it was Joe Romo who's answering phones today. Of course, Joe Ellen Schilke. She is the hostess with the mostest, and she'll be coming up with Art in Your Ear coming up in just a few minutes here right after NPR News. Want to thank Brian Nathan, Democratic candidate running for State Senate District 14, March 24th. Again, we'll see if we get his Republican opponent on the show next week, but we'll be back here next week, and we hope you tune in as well. You are listening to WMNF 88.5 FM in Tampa. We'll see you next week.